On August 9, 378 AD, under a scorching Thracian sun, the Eastern Roman Empire's premier military force met its destiny on a dusty plain near Adrianople. Welcome back to World Chronicles. Emperor Valens, commanding nearly 40,000 elite troops, the strength of the East, led his army into battle. By nightfall, Valens was dead, his body vanished amidst the carnage. Two-thirds of his soldiers, the pride of the legions, were slaughtered. This was more than a defeat. It was a complete annihilation, swift and brutal, inflicting a wound the Roman Empire would never truly heal. In a single, devastating afternoon, an ancient power's foundations began to crumble, marking what many historians consider the true beginning of the Dark Ages. To understand Rome's unprecedented catastrophe, we must look beyond the battlefield itself to a deeper history of imperial arrogance, desperate migration, and a profound betrayal that led to Rome's own destruction. By the latter half of the 4th century, the vast Roman Empire was geopolitically divided. In the west, a younger Emperor Gratian held court, his domains relatively stable. To the east, however, Emperor Valens faced persistent external pressures and internal complexities, the burdens of governance often demanding his full attention. Against this backdrop of an already strained empire, a new, overwhelming force suddenly appeared from the vast, unexplored steppes of Central Asia around 370 AD, the Huns. These enigmatic nomads, with unparalleled horsemanship and a reputation for swift, brutal warfare, swept westward with unstoppable momentum. Their presence was a cataclysm for the tribes in their path. For the Goths, specifically the Thervingi and Greuthungi, who had long cultivated lands near the Black Sea, the Hunnish advance presented an inescapable dilemma. These were not aggressors seeking glory or conquest. They were settled communities caught between an existential threat from the east and the formidable Roman frontier to the west. Driven by desperation to escape annihilation, these Goths transformed from independent peoples into a tide of refugees, seeking only asylum and survival within Roman lands. Their journey across the Danube became a prelude to disaster. In 376 AD, a desperate multitude of Goths, predominantly Thervingi, gathered along the northern bank of the Danube River. Their homes annihilated by the Hunnic advance, tens of thousands pleaded for sanctuary within Roman imperial borders. Valens' eastern administration extended an offer, refuge and land within the empire in exchange for military service. This was not an act of benevolence, but a cold, calculated transaction driven by immediate need for manpower and, crucially, by rampant greed. Officials such as Lupicinus, the comes Rei Militaris in Thrace, and Maximus, a regional dux, saw not fellow humans in dire straits, but a vast, exploitable resource, ripe for cynical profit. Their first act was to demand the surrender of all weapons, a seemingly reasonable condition for asylum, yet one that rendered the Goths utterly vulnerable. Then came systematic exploitation. Food, desperately needed by the starving refugees, was sold at exorbitant prices. The contemporary historian Ammianus Marcellinus records a dog being traded for 10 pounds of silver, an unthinkable sum for those who had lost everything. Stripped of possessions and denied adequate provisions, the Goths were forced into unpaid labor, their children even sold into slavery to procure basic sustenance. This was not merely mismanagement, it was a deliberate, dehumanizing policy. Roman avarice transformed desperate refugees into indentured servants, stripped of dignity and hope, igniting an inevitable, violent rebellion within the empire. The relentless exploitation, the starvation, the forced sale of their children transformed the Goths' initial desperation into a potent, burning hatred. Their leader, Fritigern, a man whose cunning matched his people's suffering, watched this transformation unfold. His initial pleas for Roman aid turned into a desperate struggle for survival, and then a clear recognition that Rome intended not to save, but to enslave. The tension reached its breaking point in 377 AD. Invited by Roman generals Lupicinus and Maximus to a banquet at Adrianople, Fritigern and other prominent Goth leaders believed they would discuss terms, perhaps a cessation of hostilities. Instead, the supposed parley was a trap. Roman soldiers surrounded the venue, with orders to assassinate the Goth leadership. It was a cynical act of treachery, a final insult meant to decapitate the burgeoning revolt before it could truly begin. But Fritigern, ever vigilant, sensed the danger. Through quick thinking, and perhaps an opportune warning, he escaped the deadly snare, emerging from Adrianople as a formidable warlord. This calculated Roman perfidy was the ultimate catalyst. It extinguished any lingering hope of peaceful resolution. The Goths, now certain of Rome's ill intent, had no recourse but outright war. What began as a desperate plea for refuge had, by Rome's own hand, been forged into a unified, full-scale armed rebellion. The plains of Thrace, where the Goths had sought sanctuary, were now poised to become the battleground for one of the greatest military disasters the Roman Empire would ever face. The confrontation, born not of barbarian aggression but Roman policy, pitted two vastly different forces against each other, embodying a fundamental clash of motivations and military philosophies. At the apex of the Eastern Roman Empire stood Emperor Valens. An experienced warrior, Valens commanded the elite army of the East, a formidable host estimated at 30,000 to 40,000 highly trained soldiers. This was the Roman war machine, renowned for its iron discipline, rigorous training, standardized equipment, and a centuries-old tradition of centralized command. Its legions, composed primarily of heavy infantry, were the bedrock of imperial power, supported by auxiliaries and a developing cavalry arm. Yet, Valens possessed a critical flaw, an overweening arrogance and a potent desire for sole glory. This hubris led him to dismiss cautious counsel, notably refusing Gratian's offered reinforcements and pushing his forces despite recent border skirmishes. He saw an opportunity for a decisive, personal victory, blind to the escalating danger. Opposing this disciplined might was Fritigern, the cunning and resourceful leader of the Thervingi Goths. His initial fighting force, numbering perhaps 15,000 to 20,000 Thervingi warriors, was not a standing army, but a desperate people defending their families within a protective wagon ledger. What they lacked in Roman discipline and uniform equipment, they compensated for with a fierce, existential fighting spirit. Crucially, Fritigern forged a formidable alliance. His forces were reinforced by elements of the Grutungi Goths, the formidable Alans, and even small units of Hunnish horsemen. This coalition swelled his numbers, potentially matching or exceeding Valens's army, and critically, provided a powerful cavalry component, particularly the heavy cavalry of the Grutungi and Alans. Fritigern's strategy was not to meet Rome in a conventional, pitched battle where Roman discipline would typically prevail. Instead, his brilliance lay in avoiding direct confrontation, conserving his strength, and seeking a trap, a moment of weakness, to unleash his people's desperate fury. Two leaders, one driven by imperial pride, the other by the raw instinct for survival, stood poised for a collision that would redefine the Roman world. In June 378 AD, Emperor Valens, driven by ambition and confidence, led his elite Eastern Roman army from Antioch. His co-emperor, Gratian, had offered Western legions to augment his strength, but Valens, eager for the sole glory of a decisive victory, dismissed this prudent counsel. His hubris was fueled by minor successes of General Sebastianus and, crucially, by flawed intelligence, which grossly underestimated Goth numbers at just 10,000 warriors. Empowered by this false estimate and self-assurance, he marched immediately. The ensuing journey towards Adrianople, under the relentless Thracian summer sun, became a grueling ordeal for his legions. Dusty roads, oppressive heat, and inadequate provisions, scant food, little water systematically drained the strength from every man. By the time they neared the Goth position, Rome's vaunted army operated at a significant deficit, its soldiers weary and parched before the first spear was thrown. Fritigern, however, was no mere barbarian warlord to be easily vanquished. Aware of Valens' swift advance and driven by desperate necessity, he dispatched envoys under a flag of truce. These were not genuine overtures for peace, but a shrewd stratagem of deception. Fritigern sought only to buy time, allowing his vital Greuthungi cavalry, led by Elatheus and Saphrax, to return from foraging and regroup. Valens, interpreting the envoys as a sign of Goth weakness, disregarded the cautious warnings of his more seasoned officers. Blinded by perceived imminent victory and impatient for battle, he ordered an immediate assault. This decision was catastrophic. It denied his exhausted army rest or proper deployment, and critically, it allowed his Goth adversaries to unite, facing Rome with the concentrated force of Fritigern's full alliance. As the afternoon of August 9, 378 AD, wore on, between the second and third hour, the Eastern Roman army, exhausted from its long, water-starved march, finally confronted the formidable Goth camp. From the Goth positions, thick, acrid smoke plumed, rising from deliberately torched fields. This was no accident. It was a calculated Goth tactic, meant to obscure their numbers, sow confusion among the Romans, and, crucially, serve as a signal for their distant cavalry. Emperor Valens, still contemplating his strategy, found his authority undermined almost immediately. On the Roman right flank, units of Scutari archers under Cassio, alongside several Auxilia Palatina cohorts, broke formation. Without clear orders, they launched a spontaneous, headlong assault, driven by frustration and ill-advised bravado, attempting to breach the Goth wagon ledger. This unauthorized charge ripped open the Roman lines. Chaos spread rapidly, a contagion of indiscipline. Officers struggled, then failed, to restore order, forcing much of the army to push forward in a disorganized advance that fatally stretched its formations and created critical vulnerabilities. At this precise, desperate juncture, as the Roman front became a disordered mass, the true horror unfolded. From behind the low hills that bordered the battlefield, a sudden, thunderous arrival erupted. Thousands of Greuthungi and Alan heavy cavalry, led by Elatheus and Saphrax, appeared. The ground vibrated with the immense power of their charge. The air grew thick with dust and the metallic scent of impending doom. With devastating force, this mass of barbarian horsemen struck directly into the exposed and vulnerable Roman right flank, a blow from which the weary legions would never recover. The sudden arrival of the Greuthungi and Alan cavalry was the decisive blow, striking the already fatigued and disorganized Roman right flank with devastating impact. This was the moment the battle transformed into a classic application of the anvil and hammer tactic. a brutal maneuver defining the day's tragedy. The Goth infantry, which had earlier held the Roman main line, now pressed relentlessly, forming the unyielding anvil. The thousands of heavy cavalry, having ridden hard and fast, became the hammer, slamming into the Roman rear and flanks. The legendary Roman legions, famed for their iron discipline and impenetrable formations, found themselves in an impossible predicament, caught in this merciless pincer movement. Their tightly packed ranks, once their greatest strength, became a fatal weakness. There was no space to execute their well-drilled maneuvers, no room for their heavy infantry to form a defensive phalanx or to properly wield their pilums and gladii. The Goth cavalry's superior mobility utterly neutralized the heavy infantry's strength, turning Rome's finest soldiers into a suffocating, struggling mass. Confusion quickly descended into panic. The proud legions, who had conquered vast empires, now stood bewildered, unable to react or defend themselves effectively. Adrianople, on that sweltering August afternoon, devolved into a vast, indiscriminate slaughterhouse. Historian Ammianus Marcellinus, an eyewitness to the era's calamities, would later describe it as an unprecedented massacre, a stark testament to the scale of the carnage. Between 20,000 and 30,000 Roman soldiers, roughly two-thirds of the entire Eastern Field Army, perished on that field. Many senior officers, tribunes, and generals fell alongside their men, their command structure shattered. Among the dead was Emperor Valens himself. The precise circumstances of his demise remain uncertain amidst conflicting accounts, a tragic anonymity reflecting the complete collapse of his imperial control. Some reports suggest he was struck down on the field by an arrow or sword, dying among his soldiers. A more prevalent account describes him being severely wounded and carried by a few loyal attendants to a nearby peasant's hut. As Goth forces swarmed the area, they surrounded the dwelling, unaware of the emperor's presence within. Without hesitation, they set it ablaze, consuming Valens in the conflagration. His body was never recovered, his reign ending not with a dignified imperial funeral, but in the ashes of a burning hovel, a stark and brutal symbol of Rome's annihilation. The twilight hours following Adrianople settled over a landscape transformed into a vast grave. Tens of thousands of Roman bodies, a significant portion of the Eastern Empire's elite army, lay scattered across the Thracian plain, a stark testament to a catastrophe unparalleled in generations. Surviving soldiers, those few who had escaped the relentless Goth cavalry, wandered disoriented, their formations shattered, their orders evaporated into the evening air. There was no rallying point, no organized retreat, only individual despair. Rome had lost more than an army. It had lost its sense of invincibility, a faith in its military supremacy that had underpinned its power for centuries. Adrianople constituted a profound strategic revelation. For generations, the disciplined heavy infantry of the legions had been the bedrock of Roman power. Yet, on August 9, 378 AD, this doctrine proved fatally vulnerable. The Goth heavy cavalry, striking with overwhelming force and mobility against an already exhausted, disorganized infantry line, conclusively demonstrated that the era of legionary dominance was drawing to a close. The battle undeniably signaled the ascendancy of mounted warfare, directly foreshadowing the cavalry-centric armies that would define the medieval period. Facing the immediate existential threat of an uncontained Goth presence, the Roman state was compelled to enact drastic and unprecedented reforms. Its very survival now necessitated a fundamental restructuring of its forces, demanding a significant increase in cavalry units and, crucially, the acceptance of barbarian mercenaries into its ranks on a scale unimaginable just days prior. The old ways had died with Valens, and Rome had no choice but to adapt or perish. Adrianople's immediate horror faded, but its long shadow stretched across generations, ultimately determining the fate of the Western Roman Empire. The Eastern Empire had lost not only an army, but a vital part of its society. Tens of thousands of highly trained soldiers perished, many of them middle-class citizens whose lives represented a significant drain on imperial vitality and human capital. More profoundly, Adrianople shattered the illusion of Roman invincibility. Rome's prestige and authority over its vast territories diminished instantly. The formidable reputation that had kept many ambitious tribes at bay for centuries vanished in the Thracian dust. The relationship between Rome and the barbarian tribes was permanently altered. The Goths, once supplicants, then rebels, were not eradicated but became an inescapable problem, deeply embedded within Roman territory. Emperor Theodosius I, Valens's successor, faced an impossible reality. The empire lacked the resources and manpower to expel them. Thus, in 382 AD, Theodosius signed the momentous Fodorati Treaty with the Goths. This agreement, born of desperation, permitted the Goths self-governance within Roman lands in exchange for military service. This was a concession of immense political and military significance, an erosion of imperial sovereignty that set a dangerous precedent. Rome, in essence, invited an autonomous, hostile force to reside within its borders, inadvertently legitimizing the settlement of future barbarian groups. This decision created a snowball effect, paving the way for further barbarian incursions and treaties, gradually weakening the Western Roman Empire from within. The integrity of Roman provincial administration withered, tax revenues dwindled, and military recruitment became ever more reliant on these increasingly unreliable barbarian Fodorati. Adrianople proved to be a fatal crack in Rome's foundations, accelerating the irreversible decline that culminated in the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. The Battle of Adrianople stands as a monumental scar on the annals of Roman history, a symbol of not just a devastating military defeat, but of an empire's internal decay and a profound loss of faith. Without that fateful day, August 9, 378 AD, the trajectory of European history might have unfolded along an entirely different course. The price of Valens' complacency, his fatal underestimation of a desperate foe, was paid in the blood of nearly 40,000 elite legionaries, irrevocably transforming Europe's immediate future. An empire that had long prided itself on its invincibility lost not only an army, but also its aura, self-belief, and ultimately, its prestige. Adrianople undeniably heralded the end of the invincible Roman infantry legend, a brutal testament to the destructive power of massed Goth cavalry under Fritigern. It demonstrated that so-called barbarian opponents possessed the strategic acumen and tactical force to utterly shatter the greatest military power of their age. This catastrophic day marked the true beginning of a dark chapter for Western Europe, often termed the Dark Ages, a turning point from which Rome's western half would never truly recover. It serves as a stark reminder that even the most formidable empires are vulnerable, not just to external threats, but to the insidious corrosion of arrogance and critical misjudgment from within. History, we are reminded, is a series of lessons written in blood and tears. Adrianople remains one of its costliest chapters, an enduring testament to what happens when pride eclipses prudence and an empire forgets its humanity. If you found this analysis insightful, please subscribe to our channel for more explorations into pivotal moments that shaped our world.